In 1964, just 2 years after the first big record contract, Brian Wilson had a nervous breakdown.
The glasses raise the fire, drunk the fullness of the wine, the dim last toast.
At 22, he was too young and too fragile for the pressure of writing, producing, performing. And it was too easy to turn to drugs. Pot, LSD, uppers, cocaine, even heroin.
A broken man too tough to cry.
I burned my brain out. My brain got burned out, and nothing left of my brain, you know.
You really think?
I turned into a vegetable over drugs, yeah. A lot of brain damage. Real lot of brain damage. And every day of my life, I pay a little dues because of the drugs I took.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older?
In painful contrast to his music, Wilson continued his downward spiral. By 1981, he had ballooned to over 300 pounds. He refused to shower and hid in his bed for 2 years.
Brian Wilson is a perfect example of the fact that in my field, I'm an artist.
This man says he's the reason Brian Wilson functions today at all. In 1983, at the family's request, Dr. Eugene Landy placed Wilson under therapy. His highly unorthodox therapy, a kind of boot camp, 24-hour supervision, diet control, exercise. Whatever Landy's method, his program worked. Brian Wilson before, Brian Wilson after. Did Dr. Landy save your life?
Absolutely. Yes, he did.
But success had a price, an astronomical price. The bills came in, $50,000 for vitamins, $25,000 for Landy's out-of-pocket expenses for 4 days in Hawaii. At one point, Landy's fees and extra charges were running well over $1 million a year. Lead singer Mike Love, who co-wrote a lot of hits with Brian Wilson, back before Landy came along.
He said he'd be there a year to year and a half. Well, when it got to be about 5 years, we realized that he has no intention of ever leaving Brian on his own.
It's now 9 years, and the family says the entire time, the sweet and loving Brian they knew has been isolated, virtually held a prisoner by Landy, and poisoned against them.
I find them to be people that are very sick. I mean, you know, I mean, I have some pity for them.
They have said that they think you're in a kind of prison.
Well, life is a prison in itself, not just the not just the Dr. Landy program, but everybody has to have a little imprisonment in order to understand that you know, that this is where we are. I mean, just, you know.
We saw where Brian Wilson has been all these years, a world where he can almost never see outsiders alone.
1, 2, 3.
When he does see other people, Landy or one of his hand-picked aides is almost always watching. Here's one of them recording us the entire time on videotape. And it's not just us. It happened to the Beach Boys, too.
True. We don't have access to him without Landy's supervision, videotaping, recording.
The family says you screened his phone calls for 9 years now.
Okay, I screened his phone calls for a year and a half.
They say you screened it for longer.
I know what they say, but I'm telling you, I screened his phone calls for a year and a half because when you treat drug addicts, the first thing you do is you change their environment.
This woman who asked not to be identified is a former Landy employee who says Landy is lying.
I was told that if Audrey, his mother, called, Brian was not allowed to take any calls.
She worked for Landy not in that first year, but within the last 2 years.
There was, in the time that I was there, not a single phone call that I was ever allowed to put through to Brian.
Screened calls, I've never heard of that before in my life. I don't know. Screened calls, there's no screened calls.
But they say you have systematically ensured that none of them can get to him.
That's crazy. He has had a number of lawyers who are all able to get him.
John Mason was
Mason was a major lawyer that got him out of the trust.
And he could always get him?
Mason got him ongoingly.
I could not reach Brian Wilson on the telephone in the entire 5 years that I represented him.
John Mason says he resigned 5 months ago after Brian Wilson, out of Landy's earshot, complained of having no freedom.
See if you can get Brian on the phone, will you?
Mason also raised questions about another kind of Landy control. He told us about a Beach Boys meeting last January. He says when Brian Wilson disagreed with Dr. Landy, Landy called a break, and Brian Wilson was given pills.
We went back in the meeting, and Brian's eyes were rolled up behind his eyelids, and he couldn't communicate anymore.
2 other participants in that meeting have supported Mason's story, though Landy denies it and says Wilson's medication is controlled by a licensed psychiatrist.
I do not give drugs to Brian.
Now they've got me on the medicine that keeps me in an even place, so I don't go woo out of control high or whoa down low. You know what I mean?
But in 1988, the authorities in charge of Landy's psychology license had their own say about the doctor. They investigated not just the Wilson case, but a charge of patient rape, which Landy had settled out of court. An accusation of freebasing cocaine. Landy denied it. Finally, in a plea bargain, Landy agreed to surrender his license, pleading guilty to 1 count of illegally giving prescription medicine to Brian Wilson. So Landy could no longer officially be Wilson's therapist. He found another job. He called it life manager. He became Wilson's business partner in a company called Brains and Genius.
Brains is Brian, the A and the I reversed, and Genius is obvious.
We're told Landy's new incarnation pays as well as his last, that he gets $35,000 a month plus extra fees. And it doesn't stop there. When Wilson got a yellow Corvette for doing a Chevrolet commercial, Landy got one too. When Wilson got an upright piano, Landy got a baby grand. We found his original contract, showing early on the doctor was positioned to reap financial benefit from co-writing music with a vulnerable patient.
But Dr. Landy, there is a rule against that. It's against the code of your profession.
It's a rule that I can't explain it to you. It's
the code of your profession.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. I not only have accepted that, I know that.
And you violated it.
But I didn't do it.
But you were preparing to take a piece of a business transaction with your patient